Please welcome our MC to the stage, Near Foundation's Abhishek Vaidyanathan.
Good morning, everybody. How's everybody doing this morning? Woo! I want to hear a little more energy here. How is everybody doing this morning? Woo! Welcome to NEARCON. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome up our first panel. Before that, I'm Abhishek Vaidyanathan, Senior Counsel at Near Foundation, and it's my first NEARCON, so I'm very psyched to be here with everyone. This morning, we've got our first panel, DeFi Onramps, how to build a better multi-chain experience. Moderating this panel is Felix Machart from Greenfield. So I'd like to welcome him up, and let's get this party started.
Hello everyone, good morning. I'm super excited to be talking today about DeFi Onramps, how to build a better multi-chain experience with this wonderful panel here. To my right, we have Josh Lee. He's the co-founder of Osmosis, an interchain liquidity hub, and also Keplr, which is a wallet for the Cosmos ecosystem. Then we have Jess Houlgrave, who is the CEO of WalletConnect, basically building a solution to connect all types of wallets to dapps. And we have Carson Brown, who is a senior protocol manager at Gauntlet. And they are largely advising protocols on risk management and also on certain multi-chain issues. So yeah, we have an ecosystem of various blockchains across several layers emerging. And that means we get more scale, we get more diversity, and specialization as well, but that also means much more complexity, which can potentially overwhelm users and also lead them to tap into security pitfalls. So, which means we need to be really thoughtful about designing user experience and abstract complexity for end users. So, yeah, I want to start out with how does it in your mind look like to have a great multi-chain UX? Should
I start?
Maybe you want to start, Josh?
Sure. Yeah, I think from my perspective, I think it is inevitable that all of crypto is going to go multi-chain. The path there is, I think, fairly evident, and we've seen the industry sort of go that way. The part that we haven't figured out is how do we sort of create interoperability at the user layer rather than the technical layer. And yeah, I'd like to kind of open up with that and see what you guys have to think about that as well.
So at WalletConnect, we have built in a deliberately chain-agnostic way from the very beginning. And WalletConnect started as a protocol to connect dapps and wallets and allow auth and sign messages, basically, that exist off-chain, but allow that connection. And so the motivator for that, for our founder Pedro back in 2018, was to create better end-user experiences. It's that QR code that many of you might be familiar with when you're logging into an app. How do I use a mobile wallet on a desktop application? And over the last 5 years, that's something that the team has really worked endlessly to try and improve, whether that be implementing different frameworks, so we have mobile native now and other ways. So I think it's really, for me, it's all about that end user experience. There's a lot of very exciting things that happen at the technical layer, but in order for DeFi, and that's the topic of this panel, but in order for crypto to continue to expand and bring in people other than the sort of the early geeks that we all identify with that get really excited about this, how do we create end user experiences that feel safe, that feel familiar, and that ultimately deliver real value to those end users?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And when I think of user experience across multiple chains, I think one of the things I try to think about is like consistency and expectations. I think one of the barriers right now is generally when going to a new chain, it comes with a new learning curve. And I think bringing that barrier down really improves the user experience, because generally you're going to another chain to achieve some type of goal. And so either it obfuscates that cross-chain experience, or if you're intentionally going to another chain, kind of reducing that level of a learning curve so you can get closer to accomplishing your goal faster.
Yeah.
So how much does the user actually know or need to know in order to use multiple chains? And like how can we cater to different types of user personas? Like are there users that want to kind of max out on like the potential of different chains, and probably others that just want to...
I think realistically the challenge here is like just the different standards of different ecosystems, right? Like for example, name services are different based on which layer 1 service that you use. You know, how endpoints work in the background are all very different. And it's hard to know how far a user will go, right? Like you can abstract a lot of these things up front, and then later once they become an advanced user who wants to do something and realize, because I'm locked into a standard, which in the very beginning helped me onboard way easier, but later realize this is completely incompatible with the rest of the crypto ecosystem, then you're sort of stuck in this loop where the benefit that you got early on for onboarding costs you the opportunities of expanding into kind of other standards and things like that. So, there is this benefit of UX, but it also comes typically at the cost of compatibility, standardization, and yeah, it's always kind of a careful balance when you're trying to design user-facing systems with kind of the blockchain with all of its decentralized like technical development, specification, and things like that. You no longer have someone to call and say, hey, this isn't working for us. Can we change this standard? Because that could take years to actually happen. So yeah, it's always this a very hard balance from our experiences.
I think you bring up a really interesting point there around standards, which is something that I think at the moment individual ecosystems are very good at, but as an overall ecosystem, we're not. We've been working a lot on the chain agnostic improvement proposals. Sorry, I can't speak yet. This morning, need more coffee. And those are really designed to work in a cross-ecosystem way. So how do we take standards that we identify working really, really well in a single ecosystem and make those extensible so that other ecosystems can start to adopt them? And naturally, within ecosystems, there's are interests aligned to create a lot of compatibility, or do you want to hold your users within your ecosystem and keep them there? And I think that that's something that a lot of layer 1s, layer 2s are really wrestling with right now. But I really believe that we are going to have this multi-chain future, and if we want to deliver better end-user experiences, having these shared standards that exist across the ecosystem, I think will benefit us all, but they're very, very hard to do. If you're sort of making standards proposals in a single ecosystem where there's a lot of alignment, we already know that that is hard to implement, and doing that on a chain agnostic basis is even harder. But I think it's going to be really essential to the growth of the ecosystem.
Mm-hmm. And I think also tapping into some of that question you asked about personas, I think it depends on the user. It also depends on the type of application the user is hoping to use. I think if you have an experienced user who's trying to do something in DeFi as they're bridging over, they're going to care about the liquidity depth of whatever token they're getting on the other side. They're going to care about if they need gas tokens, and also care about the reach of whatever token they end up getting, whether it has a lot of use cases in a lot of different protocols. On the flip side, if you have a maybe relatively inexperienced user and they're interested in some type of gaming application, all this stuff doesn't really matter to them. And so it's kind of all about catering the multi-chain experience to the use case and the experience of the user. And I think that's why we're starting to see different bridges and different kind of multi-chain adapters built into the applications themselves, because it's really hard to kind of give that control off to another a different bridge provider.
Yeah, bridges is definitely an interesting topic, a very important topic. I want to touch on that a little bit later again. But first, maybe Jess, do you want to share a little bit more about the work WalletConnect is doing in standardization, since you brought that point up as well?
Yeah, so I think one of our core philosophies is to be fully chain agnostic. In a world where there are more and more chains and more variety of chains, that becomes increasingly hard for us. But it's something that we still really endeavor to do. And so at the protocol layer, that is built with such low opinionated kind of technology that it can be built on and compatible with any chain. The higher up you get in our stack of SDKs, the more opinionated they become and the less generalizable they come. But we're starting to expand those. From a standards perspective, WalletConnect has always been very focused on the EVM ecosystem and building standards there. But it was a couple of years ago that we really started with the CAIPs. And I think we're up to some 130, 140 different proposals with that right now. And more chains are starting to get involved with it. That I think is going to be helpful for us to build great end user experiences at that intersection between apps and wallets, but also just for end users. So you can imagine sign in with Ethereum that people are talking about. There's a proposal under CAIP right now for sign in with X. So the idea would be that there's a shared standard across ecosystems for that. And there are many of those being proposed. And I think we're really excited to see the growth of that community and those proposals coming through. Part of the challenge is how you actually get those implemented, right? And so that there are some great proposals out there, but delivering really amazing end user experiences depends on the cooperation of those chains. We've been incredibly lucky over the last few years to work really broadly across different chains, different wallets, and different applications. And so, it's a lot of the team at WalletConnect are really focused on driving those forwards. But I think, I would encourage chains, builders to take a look at those too. Because I think that that's really going to deliver the end user experience, which, to Carson's point, is going to really vary as to what they want out of these products, how experienced they are, what their tolerance for risk is, what their tolerance for fees are. And that's one of the things that excites me about the DeFi ecosystem right now is we're starting to see that variety, and we're starting to see applications that are catered for more experienced users, for less experienced users. And I think as DeFi continues to grow and also becomes more embedded in other applications, whether it's gaming or other things, they'll have different needs there as well. And so defining those standards really clearly is going to be important.
Mm-hmm. Do the others have any points on standardization, maybe also like how to integrate that in Keplr wallet?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, it's kind of a, I always bring up two sides of everything, but there's also this like incentive issue where, you could sort of have someone standardize something, but, why should someone actually use this standard? So kind of the other flip side of this is like, I think there is a very market-driven, strategic way of things being standardized, right? Like, as EVM gets used in more rollups, layer 2s, things like that, we have seen kind of, a lot of the EVM standards gets ported over to other chains as well, even if in the lack of like a clear standard of how to do it. So I think there definitely needs to be some sort of like balance of we're not over-specifying things and leaving room for just kind of, users and markets and incentives to play out, right? We're going to see different potentially conflicting standards, and we're not going to have someone to say, hey, which is the right decision here. At the end of the day, it could end up in a competition. It could be a little bit messy, but hopefully at the end of this, you see kind of a more organic standard emerge, alongside kind of some level of, let's at least agree to, standardize on a few fairly non-controversial things as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, in my head, I keep going back to a not a blockchain comparison, but thinking about iPhone ports and thinking about kind of the debate going on with USB-C and Lightning ports, and it's a balance of innovation. You know, Apple says, oh man, we shouldn't use USB-C, we want to build better and better plugs. And then there's kind of like the builder point of view. It's like, well, we need to standardize this so that builders and you can have an ecosystem where other people can tap into this. I think it's kind of the same thing here, where like standardization will help the builders because they can have, they can come into a new ecosystem with an expectation of how their applications might fit into it. And then there's the innovation side of it where it's like, well, what if I want to build something that doesn't necessarily fit into this standard? So I think it's all about kind of balancing it, and we see these kind of these discussions play out in multiple industries like plugs. Yep. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I guess like you touched also about like the EVM, how I guess that has emerged as like the standard, and a bunch of other virtual machines have maybe advantages, but so far like still most activities on EVM chains. But yeah, there's like we'll see how this plays out.
Yeah, and the thing is, I think there are plenty of people who would say the standards currently implemented on the EVM side isn't perfect, but it's like, all right, it's adopted everywhere at this point that it's too hard to kind of rewind these changes than just sort of go with it and improve it from there on, kind of thing, right? So
yeah. I guess often it's something that's good enough that then gets adopted widely. But I guess like how can wallets actually simplify the experience for users? Like, given that you have in some ways you have standardization, but then in other ways you don't, and you need to maybe shift between different chains, and also you need to bridge. Like we're gonna talk about the risks in a bit regarding that as well. But yeah, how does a wallet make it easy for users to just interact with chains?
Yeah, I think one of the largest changes that we implemented, where Cosmos is fairly multi-chain, and we do see kind of crypto ecosystems outside of Cosmos as well going to this multi-chain direction. And one fairly major paradigm shift that we had to implement was remove the notion of kind of a token being in one blockchain. And what I mean by that is now you can have ETH on every other chain in basically all of crypto. So how do you show that, right? Like, so previously, you would only assume that ETH only existed on the Ethereum mainnet, but now it's sort of everywhere. So I think one of the first things that we did was, previously you had to explicitly set which network you are active on as a wallet, right? So me as 0x1234 am interacting with Ethereum mainnet. If I want to do it on Polygon, now I have to switch this thing. Whereas now, it's sort of the norm that you may have an application that has a transaction that's getting sent out on Ethereum, also on Polygon, and the fact that you would have to switch every single time would just be a massive pain. So trying to kind of remove the idea of connecting to a specific chain and building interaction points more focused on what is the user trying to do. And typically, in the current market, that has a lot to do with what token am I trying to move, what NFTs am I trying to buy. So kind of putting, previously I think in the hierarchy of how UX was, information was shown, chains were sort of the first thing that you had to select. I think now we're kind of reassessing and realizing, hey, chains are sort of something that's underneath the token, the asset, the contract, more contextual to that, rather than, I would like to, on Ethereum, interact with this token. Now you're sort of going into this paradigm of, I would like to move this token from Ethereum, kind of thing. So I think that would be kind of the role that wallets have. And then ultimately, one issue that we have with bridging is there are so many different bridges, and sometimes it's hard to know what's safe, what's not, what's fast, what's cheap. And yeah, that's kind of TBD from our perspective, because we may push to a very cheap and fast bridge and later realize it was unsafe, and then it wasn't, the cost of it wasn't very apparent when we were pushing users to it, but it could pay off. It could be a big price to pay at a later point when that bridge gets hacked or something, right? So from our perspective, we're not always trying to push the user to what seems to be the easiest, cheapest, fastest solution, but also have to be this moderator of, hey, we do have more technical depth than the average user, And there are opinionated decisions that we make in terms of which service bridge providers that we push towards, because there is this risk that the average user may not know about, right? And even if that means at the cost of slightly more time for that bridging to happen, or slightly higher transaction costs. So yeah, I think that's one of those more opinionated decisions that each wallet can independently make based on their assessment, rather than kind of this one size fits all for all ecosystem, all wallets, all dapps kind of thing.
I think that's also where we have to do more to help end users to understand those decisions and explain what we're doing and why. So, giving people optionality, but highlighting the risks, or demonstrating, like, this is why this is the recommended bridge. There are these other alternatives, but they come with a user kind of buyer beware narrative. Because I think, especially as we bring more people onto these platforms, those are the people who are going to see, oh, this is just lower fees, I should go there, when maybe the liquidity isn't there, maybe there are other risks, as you say. So I think that we have, in all those user experiences, those user interfaces that we're creating, we also have an obligation to help pass on that knowledge and educate our users around why these decisions are made for them, or why those recommendations are made for them. Because that ultimately gives them more freedom overall, helps keep them safe, and gives them more control, which is what we're all here to do. But we want to do that in a way that's not just off you go and good luck, but actually, like, let me help you get to that state.
Yeah, I think both of you nailed this question. I don't have a ton to add. I would just tie it back to what I had said, I think, to the first question about learning curves. And I think with when you're using a wallet that is going across multiple chains, it's really just about abstracting away some of that learning curve when you go to a new ecosystem, and make sure that you can essentially have the same kind of smooth interface, and basically have that learning curve be built into the wallet instead of for the ecosystem itself.
Yeah.
And what are the types of risks you would watch out for when analyzing bridges, or generally also advising clients and protocols what types of bridges to implement? I guess, like, regarding standardization, there's this other point where you have like multiple different derivative tokens of different bridges then that can also be confusing in the end for users that might not be inherently super risky by themselves, but I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of the things we're seeing right now is these bridged assets are coming with an additional cost associated with them. Generally, that's in liquidity depth, but as well as just kind of how willing users are to hold them. When these bridge tokens are in protocols, they're generally at a higher cost as well, just because, unfortunate as it is, bridges have been one of the largest, hacking destinations, and because of that, these bridged assets are viewed as riskier assets. So I think one of the things that we've been noticing is just kind of like how that risk is being transitioned over to the users, and it's something that users need to be aware of as they're using bridged assets in whatever DeFi protocol they're interested in. I think the other part of it would also be just being able to count on this liquidity. I think as liquidity spreads out across multiple different chains, one of the things at Gauntlet that we look at when setting almost all parameters is liquidity depth. And we're almost always looking at that as liquidity depth on a single chain, just because we can't really count on the liquidity on another chain to be available in time for different atomic transactions that are generally used in liquidations or arbitrage. So I think as that experience improves and that bridge speed comes down and becomes more trusted, it also just expands the amount of liquidity that's available and actually makes the user experience for all DeFi applications a lot smoother for users, because you're able to tap into so much more liquidity.
I guess the point you're touching upon, that you need to see liquidity on individual chains, it's like a more general kind of trend or concept that of asynchronicity across several chains versus on one unified state machine. Do you think that's something we need to get used to work with asynchronous environments?
Yeah, I think it's inevitable that today Uniswap exists on multiple different chains, and the price that you get to swap from token A to B will be different from point chain A, chain B, chain C, et cetera, et cetera. And the whole idea of flash loans, right, only exists when you have this kind of synchronous environment where you're able to interact with multiple applications within the same transaction. But I think as you approach this multi-chain thing, where it takes more than one transactions for an interaction from one chain to be finalized on another chain, I think we're kind of going back and saying, all right, what are some of these multi-application interactions that traditionally have worked in the world where DeFi only existed on just Ethereum versus today when the same applications exist on multiple things, right? So it definitely raises the complexity of calculations that you have to do, kind of risk factors that you have to put into where a simple arbitrage that worked in a synchronous environment may be far more risky in this like asynchronous multi-chain environment. And yeah, at the end of the day, I don't know if the average user should even know that, but hopefully we will have kind of more expert kind of institutions and enterprise have focused around that and kind of solving that, where the user doesn't have to figure that out. There is a separate kind of dedicated entity figuring that out in the background.
I think the other thing with asynchronous environments that we think about, is like oracles, for example. Oracles are pretty core to a lot of applications we see right now, and if we say like heartbeat of these different chains are kind of at a different pace, and one Oracle update goes through before another one, that presents potentially, a vector for like an economic attack. So that's like another kind of thing to be cognizant of as these, different ecosystems operate at kind of different speeds, is kind of making sure that these cross-chain applications are synchronized as well.
Yeah, so I guess users can move across bridges. You also already touched upon like having several instantiations of the same application across different chains. So like, should dapps build multi-chain, also being connected in some way? Or is it okay to expect from users that they move to the native chain where a specific dapp is based on?
Yeah, I think in the future, so there's the whole meme of like fat protocol thesis where the protocol captures all the value. I think we're kind of seeing a little bit of a transformation from the fat protocol thesis to like fat application thesis, where people are saying, hey, it's the good apps that capture value. Eventually, I think it's even going to move further away to this like other layer of like fat interface thesis. We're already seeing this play out when Uniswap turned on, taker fees on their front end, right? Like, so it's like the order flow that Uniswap gets from app.uniswap.org is massive, and that's where kind of the value capture is. So eventually, I do think that interfaces of applications figuring out the multi-chain story faster and better will eventually kind of pay off at the end of the day when the rest of crypto becomes even more intertwined than it is today. And yeah, and then it will definitely go through a cycle of kind of ups and downs, right? Where you see an interface that optimizes for low fees and speed, but then maybe it just blows up when a giant bridge hack happens. So there's that up cycle of something cheap and fast grows really quickly, but also just blows up very quickly. And we'll just definitely see this kind of cycle where hopefully we'll just find this fairly good equilibrium of cost, UX, efficiency, speed, etc.
No, I completely agree. I think that the more and more users come into this space, the likelihood is that a lot of those users, and probably a majority, are much less sophisticated than the users that we have today, right? The early adopters that are in there that are really excited about this have a different approach to using applications than those who follow later, who typically are here for a very specific reason, that there's value. And so it's not just about let's build something cool and hey, I as the early adopter want to take some risk and play with it and see what happens. The later wave of users that we bring into this ecosystem are going to be much more demanding in terms of what they want as a user experience, the safety that they expect. And so being able, as you say, to build for that mass adoption and solve those problems in a way that shows real value to those end users. It's not just about demonstrating cool tech. It's about saying, hey, this is something that is going to create real value for you. That, I think, is exactly where the value is going to sit.
Yeah, and I think right now, talking about dApps and whether or not they should be built multi-chain, I think right now we kind of see this fall into two categories. You see applications that are deployed isolated on single chains but across multiple, so multiple isolated applications on multiple chains, or a kind of single application that is built multi-chain as a feature. And I think right now we do see multi-chain as a feature, not necessarily something that people assume to be built into applications. So right now, if you're a dApp builder considering whether or not to build multi-chain, I think that's something to kind of be cognizant of is multi-chain one of the core features of what I am building? Because I think right now that is how it's perceived. I think eventually we will transition away from that, where multi-chain becomes kind of an assumed feature instead of something that is viewed as a feature. But I think as we are right now, that's just not necessarily the case.
So our time is up. Thanks a lot. That was super interesting. I guess if anybody from the audience has any further questions, you can find us around at the conference. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everyone.